Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Heavy Hands. I'm your host, as always, Conor McGregor. With me, even more, as always, is Phil McKenzie, Dr. Phil McKenzie. My apologies. And we are also very happy to be joined this week by the UFC's own Andre Fili. Andre, thank you so much for hopping on the show to discuss UFC 264 with us.
I believe that's Andre Touchy-Feely.
I'm sorry. I know you prefer the full name. So, Andre, tell me about your last fight. What do you? How did it go?
I think there's been some sort of misunderstanding.
Wait, you sound weird, Andre. Did you eat too much pizza this morning? You sound a little logy.
I mean, yes, but that's besides the
point. It's Tom Feely. It's Tom Feely of Sherdog.com. We made a terrible mistake. But seeing as how you're here, Tom, welcome to the show, and thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'll do my best, even though I did have too much pizza this morning.
Well, we just considered that you're really a man after our own hearts, more out of necessity than like the sort of perversion that drives me and Phil, because the two of us are famously into like weird undercard fights and middleweights. And because you do the Sherdog previews, you have to talk about all those fights for your job.
All those wasted words on Alan Amadovsky versus Yao Zhonghu.
That's right. For a second, I thought you said Omari Akhmedov, Brad Tavares, and I was about to get upset because I was very much looking forward to that one, and it was good, damn it. I liked it.
There are never too many words wasted on Brad Tavares, Omari Akhmedov.
That's right. They are wasted, but you can't waste too many.
It's in the rain.
So we're going to be talking about UFC 264, obviously. Conor McGregor, Dustin Poirier 3. Guys, I think breaking this one down will be a snap. But before we get into that, Tom, how did you get into doing previews? And let us in a little bit on your process for analyzing and predicting fights. I think I trust you're better at it. At least the prediction side than Phil and I.
I was going to say I hope so, but that sounds cruel. But
no, that's fine. That's
I like
fine.
To think I do.
That's okay.
Yeah, I just kind of like I actually started doing stuff just among friends back in like 2013, just with Rousey and then Connor. Basically, friends knew me as the UFC guy, so I would just kind of break down fights and send out a newsletter. And with my just wanting to be thorough, I would go all the way down to the undercard bouts. Then basically, one of my friends basically said, "Hey, you should at least put it somewhere." So I just did like a WordPress or a Blogspot or something, and then Combat Docket, RIP, who I guess doesn't exist anymore. They reached out to me.
But Sean's a great guy, and it was a very good concept.
Yeah, just I was surprised. I got the Sherdog gig, but I kind of wasn't keeping up, and then I went to build stuff and found that was gone. But so in 2017, Sean from Combat Docket reached out to me, basically saying like, hey, we'd love to give your your place a spot there. And then off of that, when Sherdog was looking for someone to take over the previews in 2018. Which would have been the Shogun versus Anthony Smith card in Germany. Ahead of that, I just reached out, was like had about a year on Combat Docket under my belt, and was like hey, do you want to give it a go? And been doing it since.
Seeing as 2018 was I think around the time I stopped doing them, I have one question for you, Tom. How's taste my big PP?
Great.
Oh, thank you. That's the first time anyone's ever said that. I really appreciate that. So what sort of approach do you take? Because that is actually a little crazy. We, I started doing analysis, like writing about fights that I cared about a lot, and then got roped into doing previews where I had to talk about the whole undercard. You started talking about the whole cards.
I would do if I still have it probably somewhere in because I do it just write everything on Gmail and then send it out. So I think I still have all my Combat Docket stuff. And I was doing over time with Sherdog, and word limits and stuff. I've kind of learned all right, you put all your words in the fights that matter. But When I was doing stuff for Combat Deck, they kind of gave me free reign. I was doing often just trying to do 3 drafts per every single fight. Also, just on a personal level, I was just unemployed. I had moved and was looking for a job over the course of basically that year. So I just had a lot of free time to just watch a lot of fights and do a lot of writing. So kind of went crazy as far as okay, I'm gonna try and get I'm just going to try and write 800 words on Abu Azaitar versus Vitor Miranda or whatever.
Wow.
Yeah, because it would just start out with, I've always been kind of a completionist just with anything I do in my life. And then just when I started, once I got out of college and basically, I had some money to go to UFC events and stuff, it was my first event was actually, we were talking about John Lineker a little bit before taping, and it was actually the Nate Diaz, Jim Miller card where Lineker debuted.
Ooh, lucky you.
So it was okay, there'd be a fight where, John Scholish or somebody, or Pascal Kraus and all these guys who were just on undercards. And I'm okay, even following this casually, where it started when I was in college in the mid 2000s, it was okay, I still really don't have any idea what these guys are about. And I'm going to be going to these fights and I want to, because they only started, the deep prelims are only starting to get televised. So I started going to, Sherdog, in fact, and just, listen to the round table, start learning and that kind of stuff. And then, pretty quickly, again, when I was going to events with friends and stuff like that, I'd be we went to, I remember 2 friends of mine went to the Jones Sun and Card in Jersey, and I'm just Steven Styler versus Kurt Hollabaugh, and the opener is going to be a banger, so.
Oh, yeah. It's always great being that friend.
Yes. Yeah, I love hearing names that, by the way, Zane Simon yells at me for mentioning on the Vivisection, like Pascal Kraus. That's the kind of fighter that I would remember and mention, that Zane would be no one knows who the fuck that is. Everyone's forgotten Pascal Kraus.
I mean, let's talk about, I'm just trying to think, Albert Chang. I remember there was recently, an Anthony Christodoulou shout-out, and I'm just I'm oh, yeah, the Greek guy. I remember him.
Your first live event was one where you learned about the ability of green hair to make people immortal.
Exactly.
It was Lineker,
in that Galdino-Lineker fight.
Right.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of other highlights. We don't talk enough about, just the complete aside, but, what is this but asides? But we don't talk enough about Nate Diaz making Jim Miller bite through his tongue as just
God.
a gnarly thing that happened.
It's the only thing I can think of when I think of that fight, actually. That image is seared into my brain. It was very viscerally upsetting at the time, caught in the guillotine, tongue sticking out, horrible image.
Also, I am very sad that I missed. Basically, I only found out a few months ago that basically Alan Belcher, who's Small Powers, was the one time Joe Rogan was good at commentary, and that basically went unknown to me for about 9 years. I'm just trying to think gnarly injury. Actually, topical given the main event. I'm trying to think gnarly injuries I've seen live. The one that immediately comes to mind was the Matt Mitrione, Travis Brown. Eye thing in Boston.
Phil, I don't think we should have invited this guy.
What's that?
He's a little sick.
Yeah.
All he wants to talk about is gruesome injuries.
I was going to say that was still not as bad as having to sit 2 rows behind Eddie Alvarez's wife during the Anthony Pettis fight. As just a completely silent crowd is just completely disappointed at this, and just one person was very happy to see what was going on.
Well, good for them. But, all right, so let's get into the main event of UFC 264, which is, of course, I'll remind you what we're talking about today. We're going to talk about Conor McGregor versus Dustin Poirier 3. We are going to talk about Stephen Thompson, Gilbert Burns, and we'll probably have time for maybe one other. And anything else we discuss in recap will likely end up as a bonus episode that may or may not feature Tom. We'll see how long it takes us to get through the 3 or 4 fights we have selected here. And then after that, we're going to move on to previewing next week's card, which is main evented by Islam Makhachev versus Thiago Moises, and has one of my most anticipated undercard style matchups in Gabriel Benitez versus Billy Quarantillo, which I think is just guaranteed to be a fire fight as long as it lasts. But Poirier McGregor, Tom, since you're the Sherdog preview master, why don't you let us know up front, what was your prediction for this fight, and how did it play out relative to that prediction?
So
did you flip flop like the rest of us?
I didn't quite flip flop like Conor, but
I saw where that was going.
Just thank you for that. Yeah. Yeah, I picked like Poirier, I believe, sometime, I think the third or fourth round, basically late. I kind of thought, Conor might try and pace himself a little bit more.
You thought his foot would stay
some
attached.
effect. Mm-hmm. Okay. Anyway, so I picked Conor, sometime in the Poirier sometime in the third or fourth round, basically, just thinking, Conor might try and pace himself a little bit or, try something. But I kind of came down, like, sometimes when analyzing fights, you're kind of like, all right, here's all the stuff a fighter can do to kind of, like, adjust and everything like that. And then at the end of the day, you kind of sit back and you realize, like, well, even if they do all that, like, the other guy's still just a better fighter. So I was, basically banking Conor and make some sort of adjustment that may, cause things to last a little bit longer. And, in practice, that kind of just wound up being kicks.
Phil and I actually, I think, were pretty strong on that for 2 points we made. One that I made, which is that Conor McGregor, as a fighter, can't really adjust so much as he can add one thing, which is very much what he did. Extra hilarious that it turned out to be the exact same thing he added for the Nate Diaz rematch. And Phil thought that McGregor might come out and just say, you know what? Fuck the 5-round thing. I'm going to come out and try to destroy this guy even faster than I did last time. And I think that's the approach he took. Phil, were you... Well, no, you disagree?
I think he should have taken that approach. I don't know if he did. I think he was genuinely trying to build up an attritional edge.
His choice of weapons was certainly attritional, but his intensity was very much come out and land 1,000 kicks as quickly as possible.
Yeah, that is true. I don't really know if there was much in the way of
thought.
He was. I don't know if he was panicked or he was just finish first, but really it's less the kicks and the pace in that in terms of how that went. It's more stuff like pulling the guillotine.
He really just
seem like he was just invested in being like a finish first fighter, which, as I've said, is absolutely how he should approach this fight, and I respect it.
Yeah, he really tried
to
bite Dustin Poirier's whole flow. The low kicks, the guillotine, all of it.
Yeah. Just swagger jacked him.
Mm-hmm. Swagger jacked him. Yes. Boy, hearing that word in that accent. Go on, Tom.
The first minute or so, it was kind of like, all right, kicks, but, Conor's still really dangerous and everything like that. And then about, a minute and a half in, Poirier's, had everything figured out, applied some pressure, and then, basically the fight was over. And I just like the idea of basically, the takeaway of watching whatever Dustin Poirier film, they watched or whatever, just being like, jump the gilly. That'll work. That'll work for us.
I actually hesitate to attribute that to forethought. I think you're right, Tom. There was a dramatic turning point. In some ways, in fact, this was, and other people have said this, in some ways this is kind of like the comparison between this and the second fight was sort of like the comparison between Holloway Aldo 1 and 2. In that the same turn more or less happened, despite any adjustments, but just faster and more violently. Because I agree with you, Tom. There was a definite turning point where Dustin Poirier made a couple reads, and decided he was ready to mix things up and start pressing forward. Which also weirdly, Phil was like, this fight also ended up looking a lot more like our expectations for the first fight. That Poirier had to respond to that intensity by pushing forward, and it turns out he can also just do that better than Conor McGregor. But McGregor hated the pressure that Poirier put on him, and he only had about 10 seconds to hate it before he was smashed into the cage, and I think that's the state of mind he was in when he grabbed that guillotine. I don't know that was necessarily a premeditated counter.
Yeah, watching things back, it felt like it took longer for things to get to the point where basically things started rolling downhill. But it really was just all right. Really the first time Poirier decided to kind of pressure and everything. It was just I guess wouldn't be panic wrestling. Conor just immediately went into not panic wrestling, panic guillotining.
He did shoot into a panic clinch. He actually did initiate the chest to chest grappling, and then Poirier used a takedown attempt to throw him into the cage, and that's where we ended up with the guillotine and McGregor just getting brutalized. And then finding out that, in fact, he probably should have stayed on the ground very shortly after. So, Phil, any particular reads on this fight? Anything that surprised you that Conor McGregor brought out, other than, well, in my opinion, it was kind of a very dumb performance from McGregor?
I don't think it was. I mean, it wasn't that dumb. It was just like there wasn't a great deal to it. Someone, I can't remember who it was. It might have been Downward's Elbow on Twitter mentioned like this was, you could see Dustin Poirier getting kicked up by Jim Miller, and they clearly thought we can do that too, and then that means we don't have to chase after him and get counterpunched. But
that was it.
So that was pretty much it. I mean, the problems are. It's really challenging not to get like preachy about this and to just be like, well, the downfall was coming for a long time, but it feels like the downfall's been coming for a long time, and it's been happening for a long time.
Yeah,
but McGregor was able to low kick Poirier, quite successfully, but also feel that the fact that McGregor, typically trains either on his own or with a bunch of yes men, generally jobbers that he's going to annihilate, has sort of contributed to the way that he just expects stuff to work.
Yeah, he expects to have like one idea, and for it to be so effective, it will carry him to victory.
So to expect that like he's going to be able to really compromise Dustin Poirier with low kicks. Dustin Poirier, he might not be the best defender of low kicks, but Jim Miller didn't win that fight.
Also, the Justin Gaethje fight.
Yeah,
he was
Justin Gaethje fight. He has trained with Thiago Alves for like a decade.
Right. Yeah, he was in a bad way against Gaethje, but putting Dustin Poirier in a bad way is no longer nearly enough to guarantee victory against him. Yeah, Miller didn't win, Gaethje didn't win. And these are guys who can do that shit for several rounds.
Yeah, I mean it's worth noting McGregor was on crutches after he beat Diaz, a very low kickable person. So I mean, we still just saw the same problems in the boxing as in the last time, just reared their heads. It just took a while for the kicking layer to, well, no pun intended, break down. It's just the fact that McGregor is so reliant on his rear hand, and it's the fact that when we've mentioned he doesn't have doesn't really have a defensive system past his counters. So once there's that sequence where Poirier buzzes him with a counter and then gets inside his reach, and Gregor once again, he doesn't have his back to the cage this time. He sort of does metaphorically because he's been trying to pressure and then suddenly he's been pushed back. Right. And he just stands there and gets lit up.
Yep.
Then clearly gets pretty badly buzzed, jumps in for a really bad takedown attempt, and then, to be honest, that's pretty much the end of the fight.
Yep.
I mean, this is one of the things in the first fight is that all that time spent in the clinch in the first one, Gregor was probably winning those exchanges, maybe. He was losing them because it was eating into his precious 7 minutes.
Sure.
But in this one, he wasn't winning at all. He was getting buzzsawed from top position.
Yeah. And it's almost like he was well aware of that no matter how well he was doing in the clinch in the first fight, it was wearing him down, and maybe that that sort of subtext informed his decision to go for the guillotine It's like, oh, well, I have to find a finish out of this exchange because if I spend time here just riding out the position, it's bad for me. I don't know.
I mean, I'm sure you saw that Kavanaugh said they specifically trained that against Poirier.
The guillotine?
Because he goes.
Oh,
they said
no.
if you're by the cage, go for guillotines because Poirier, he tries to. He always shoots takedowns by the cage.
No.
It's like people have tried doing that to him before. It hasn't worked.
It's his move. He's very comfortable with that move.
Yeah.
And McGregor
he also
isn't.
does that himself when he has his back to the cage. He's like,
oh no. Well, speaking of
it should be the MMA specific rule of don't hook with a hooker. Should be
yes,
jump the ghillie on a guillotine guy.
That's right. Don't try to guillotine the fucking executioner, you dope. John Kavanaugh also thought everything was going great. So
yeah, I mean, I respect that. That is a man who is desperately holding on to his meal ticket, like with a white knuckle grip.
Yeah, maybe if I'm just really, really nice to my meal ticket, he'll keep me around, even though he's going to clearly continue losing worse and worse, because I'm so much of a yes man, I can't help him anymore. If I ever could. Tom, the horrific leg break, clearly all you want to talk about. Any thoughts on how that actually came about? There's a bunch of wild theories flying around. Obviously, Dustin Poirier said it was a check. If you look back at the moment that he indicated where he pointed at McGregor, it wasn't actually really a check, but McGregor did seem to kick right onto the side of his knee.
Yep.
What do you have any thoughts on how that break may have occurred? I mean, obviously,
it's literally like that, or the was it Eric Nixick's mom pointing out like the kick right before basically he went down.
Yeah. There was a hard low kick. There's also in that final sequence a front kick he throws to the body. He appears to catch Poirier's elbow on the shin.
Yes, that's the one. Yes. Or maybe just Conor McGregor is the greatest fighter of all time, and in 6 months he developed a kick just so powerful that his own body could not withstand it.
Yeah, maybe that's it.
That was the big adjustment, and
So people have heard our thoughts somewhat, me and Phil's thoughts on what McGregor should have done. What do you think he could have done differently to beat Dustin Poirier? Obviously, we know he can beat Dustin Poirier, if not necessarily this version. But where did he go? Where did he go really wrong, and what could he have done differently?
I mean, that's what I'm trying to wonder, because I mean, there is something too, and like. I use this more in the context of like other fighters who escape me at the moment, or basically, if you're a first-round finisher with no cardio, it's like by trying to, become a more patient fighter and everything, you're really just sort of guaranteeing you're going to lose slower, increasing your chances of winning the fight, Like, the thing I think about is, like, just the fact that now they've fought, 3 times, and it's taking Poirier less and less to feel Conor out. Because I think, y'all have talked about this, and Zane Simon's talked about this on the Vivi, just, like, the thing, the big advantage of Conor, I think, is just that him having all of his reads immediately in a center range, and just sort of that shock he puts into an opponent. Mm-hmm. So, just, again, like, I would give Conor a better shot, such as it is, against some of the other top lightweights in the division. But
sure.
Just when it comes to Poirier, I'm kind of like, without that initial shock, now that it's been like, I like the Holloway Aldo comparison, where basically, okay, we're just picking up where the last fight left off, kind of similar to I think of like Dillashaw Garbrandt, where it's like, okay, in the first fight the problem was figured out, and then the second fight is just This is just happening quicker and quicker. I'm not really sure where, it's like, even like going into the prep for that, like I said, it was like, okay, there's all the stuff Conor can do, but whenever I like arrive back at it, really just comes out, to if Conor can't shock him early, Poirier's still just a much better fighter. And so, yeah, like, I don't even think, like, I think about, like, okay, if he does bank even more on, like, all right, I was going to go for this first round knockout, like, I don't know what it is that's just... Yeah,
I mean, I do.
More spins.
I'm almost more convinced than ever of what you just said, what Phil said last week, that McGregor should just lean into the first round finisher angle because at this point I think it's too baked in. And I think it is quite literally the reason for his sudden fades in every fight. He's so keyed in. He's an inherently tense fighter, a lot like Jose Aldo, in fact, with half the heart and none of the self control. He can be just extended in a fight, and that can be really dangerous for him because he does everything so hard, and he's just laser focused on nailing people in that first layer. And I think, man, Dustin Poirier, for as quick a turnaround as it was, I thought he did a fantastic job, better than last time, of sort of penetrating that first layer very deliberately. The exchange leading up to, the sequence leading up to that exchange where Poirier is pushing McGregor back and hitting him with shots, is really cool because what Dustin does is they're sort of fencing at range. He enters the pocket with a jab, and Poirier and McGregor fires a 1-2, and his jab gets there way faster. It binks Poirier. Oh God, I used Robin Black's term. It clips Poirier right on the face. Poirier, being a more layered fighter by far, responds to that by moving his head. Very good, right? You know a 1-2 is likely. Move your head after the jab touches you. And ends up slipping the left hand that is coming right on its heels. Then they reset. Poirier re-engages with a jab feint. He seems to have anticipated Conor's own adjustment, which is to eschew the jab and just throw the lead left, expecting that Poirier is going to try to slip that second layer and catch him on the slip. And instead, Poirier anticipates that left hand and slips outside and lands a wide left hand of his own. So, that's just, to me, Poirier's got his number. He knows he can counter him on the back foot because McGregor's always there to be countered, and indeed, the exact same counter right hook was there for Poirier once in this fight. And now he knows that he can draw out McGregor's counters and get to that second layer of punching exchanges and beat him by pushing him backwards, too. And he can out-wrestle him. So that's it. That's beating Conor McGregor right there. And I don't know. I would be very, not just because of the broken leg, and we'll have to see how he recovers from that, but I would be very hesitant to suggest that Conor McGregor has a good chance at all of winning a potential fourth fight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think so many of the problems are baked in at this point.
Yeah.
They're technical, in terms of the defense. They are psychological in terms of the positions he can get put in. They're physical. He is the less durable fighter at this point in two very, very key ways.
Yeah, not just
his
chin.
body's more likely to fall to pieces. McGregor still seems to have a great chin.
Yes.
Because Poirier isn't putting him out.
Well, he did last time.
Yeah, pretty much.
He knocked him out. I mean, he was out. At this point, it does seem that Poirier can take a McGregor shot a little better than McGregor can, if only because the moment McGregor does take a Poirier shot, his brain collapses. And that makes him more susceptible to being actually finished. But anyway.
But yeah, he can't keep the pace.
Yeah.
It does seem like there's too many things going against him. I will say, it is worth at this point to look back at McGregor, now that it seems that he's no longer going to be particularly a title contending fighter. It seems
no, definitely not.
Relatively safe to say. I mean, obviously he can get put into those fights, but it seems hard to see him winning.
Does he want any of those fights? I think he's going to be obsessed with getting it back from Dustin Poirier for the rest of his career.
And Poirier for his own. I joked about Poirier. He should just fight McGregor over and over again because it's super easy and it'll make him tons of money.
Absolutely.
Yep.
I don't think he actually should do that. I think he should think he should take the Oliveira fight, but that McGregor fight is now a blank check in his back pocket. He can cash it in at literally any point in his life. Go on. If he goes on a 3-4 fight losing skid, he can just be like, I want the McGregor money.
Sure.
He can cash it in whenever he likes.
I like that. And in the meantime, McGregor would be much better suited to pursue that Diaz trilogy.
I think McGregor should fight Tony Ferguson. I agree with Zane. I mean, admittedly, it would be a fight that McGregor might actually has a very solid chance of actually winning.
Oh yeah, that's why I don't like it.
Yeah, but I think it makes sense. Ferguson deserves a payday, and he deserves one last chance at like eating a big name.
Sure.
After all that time getting screwed over.
I must imagine those press conferences.
Oh my God. McGregor's, well, it would be actually really interesting because McGregor's not good at trash talk anymore either.
Oh God, yeah.
Like, did you see him at the press conference just getting shouted at by fans and just like pursing his lips and sitting there? What was that?
Yeah.
Something's not going well.
He's really bad now, really bad.
Dustin Poirier, nobody's idea of a smooth talker, had like twice as many good lines. Not a good sign for the man's mental state. Tom, thoughts on the future? Anything you'd like to see out of these guys next?
I mean, my immediate thought, and this is sort of half joking, was like part of me kind of wants to see like I was like, hey, got to test out that angle. Let's do Conor McGregor versus Ryan Hall, greatest fight of all time. But yeah, just like I said, I'd give like Conor like a little bit, whatever puncher's chance there is, I'd give him a little bit more against everyone else in the division, just because he hasn't fought any of them yet, and there'd be a chance to shock him. But yeah, he's pretty much done as a contender. And then I'm really looking forward to Poirier Oliveira. That's I'm hoping it gets enough shine as it should whenever they decide to do it. But even though it won't. But yeah, just. Yeah, basically echoing all that. Yeah.
Well, I will say that like there is a risk at points like this of sort of like hating on McGregor to slightly like downplay what he was and who he was, because I think this kind of thing was always, in some ways, it was always coming. He was always going to get stuck into ugly, into just hard physical wars which he couldn't get out of, and which weren't against glacially slow people like Diaz, where he couldn't just literally physically run away from them. And he could never maintain that kind of size bully success that he had at 145 because he physically couldn't make it anymore.
Right.
I mean, looking at both these guys in the cage, I found myself thinking, like, are they both actually just bigger than GSP at this point? But so in some ways, the seeds of his destruction were baked in, but also the whole idea of him being like unable to, that like he did do some amazingly impressive, genuinely gutsy things on the way up.
Oh my God, it was all guts.
Like the Holloway win, taking the Mendes fight in the first place. The UFC did their best to protect him from wrestlers, but when he was given the chance to fight one, he didn't shy away. And that was when he was calling the shots. Even adapting to Diaz. As I said, Diaz is a very slow man. There was some wiggle room there, but he, there genuinely was something special there in Conor McGregor.
Of course, that can't be denied.
But unfortunately now, he's just reached that point where it doesn't carry him through anymore, and and also he's a dickhead, and fuck him.
Yeah, fuck him. I suggest we take a moment of respect for the Conor McGregor that once was, and I'd like all of us to take a knee. In fact, take 3. Okay, let's wrap this up before I think of any more terrible jokes. When we come back, Gilbert Burns defeated Stephen Thompson, making Phil and I look dumber than ever before. And Sean O'Malley, Chris Moutinho, maybe Aldana Kunitskaya instead of that. I don't know. We haven't fully decided, but we are going to talk about a little more UFC 264 after this, and then move on to Makhachev versus Moises coming up.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
Okay, welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are continuing, as promised, through UFC 264's undercard, and that all starts with the co-main event, Stephen Thompson versus Gilbert Burns, the Wonder Boy versus the Prodigal Son. And boy, Phil, we were extremely confident. It was one of those calls where I felt it was such a straightforward read that I was ready to make the call almost immediately after the fight was made months ago. And before I guess we revel in our own humiliation, Tom, what were your expectations for this fight?
I was a little bit more like, hey, this could be a toss-up. I was still pretty confidently in Thompson. I just wasn't that really like the lock status. It seemed like a lot of people at least were talking about it, like leading up to the fight. Mm-hmm. But I thought it would be more because basically the first intrigue was, all right, Stephen Thompson against someone who's going to at least like look to wrestle somewhat. Yeah. It's just been a while, and was he 38, 39 at this point?
How bulletproof is his wrestling really? Given that. Though the glimpses we've seen of it have been really impressive. And indeed, it wasn't like it was bad in this fight. He actually did a pretty damn good job of rebuilding his position, but we haven't really seen it tested against persistent wrestlers that often.
Yeah. Yeah, the persistence was really the thing. And the persistence with the combination of, like, okay, even if Burns can't, like, hold Stephen Thompson down for a while, just he's, such a talented grappler that it's like, that one... once maybe all he needs. And also I thought, there was a chance to him being reckless, like he could be fast enough.
Sure.
Or, him being reckless on the feet, which we saw some of at the end of the first round.
Boy, 10 seconds.
Him being reckless on the feet.
10 seconds that Henry Hooft was definitely not embarrassed by.
Yeah. But just the combination of like that and, Thompson being in his late 30s now and slowing down a little bit. Just the idea that, all right, like he has a, even if he was I think like, because the comparison they made going was like the Vicente Luque fight, and it was like, even though I think like Burns had less of a chance of putting on a consistent performance, I thought there were enough times where it's like, okay, he could shock him in one moment to at least like, make this interesting enough, where I didn't think it was a total gimme.
Wisely sober and measured prediction that ended up being very true, as it was not by any means a blowout for Gilbert Burns. It was, in fact, I think there's a case to say it could have gone to Stephen Thompson. Though, like, spiritually, I'm actually more satisfied by Gilbert Burns getting that decision. Largely because, I thought, it was a bad style matchup. We've seen him lose fights like Stephen Thompson tends to win before. And I think he avoided that happening with some really good decisions and a degree of discipline that we really would not have seen out of the Gilbert Burns who, say, lost to Rashid Magomedov.
Yep. And just like a thing, just like for my future, like, going in, I thought there was some interest in like, hey, if Thompson wins, at least, it could be an interesting stylistic test for Usman. And then basically like within a round, I was like, well, even if Thompson cuts this out or turns this around, like, all right,
Oh, now that I know Usman has this fight in his back pocket, I no longer really care to see him fight Stephen Thompson anymore. I'm with you on that. Phil, okay, I feel like we've braced ourselves enough. Why were we so wrong?
Sort of like you said just there. I think I'm genuinely. This is one of those fights where people seem to be caught up with the fact that it was kind of a little bit ugly.
Yeah.
But honestly, have to give a lot of respect to people who can win things which I see as completely as almost unwinnable style matchups.
Yeah,
it's like I remember for the Depressed Us we watched Maynard Guida, which Guida won.
Yes, he did.
And he never should have won it because Maynard has more power, is a better wrestler, has reach and size and everything else.
Yep.
He wins it with pure trash, and just running away and being annoying, but
considered trash. It was the trash was there for a very good reason because he did justifiably win that fight.
It was like, what if Frankie Edgar, if he fought like Frankie Edgar, but like the version that Conor Rebush has made up in his head. What if that was how Clay Guida fought?
What do you mean?
Because you hated Frankie Edgar, and you're like, he does just run away. And
yeah, my fantasy coward, Frankie Edgar.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So this I thought was super smart. I thought it was a synergy of several different approaches, all of which worked nicely. One of the things that made Burns seem like such a layup was that he's super aggressive and unsafe with his aggression. But it seems like Team Evil had trained him basically not lead. So he took, they were talking a bit about, how Tyron Woodley fought such a great fight against Stephen Thompson. No, he didn't. But it is notable that if you just stay, so that you can burn giant portions of the clock by not leading on Stephen Thompson.
Right. There was a kernel of strategy to be taken from the Woodley-Thompson fights that I think they picked up on very astutely.
And secondly, even though Maya has never fought Stephen Thompson, he fought a bit like Damian Maia. He didn't blow all his takedowns on the first shot, trying to double leg Stephen Thompson. What he was trying to do was to lock him up and then push him into the cage. Where, again, he was burning more time on the clock, but also where he was able to eventually get round the side and convert it into a takedown.
Yeah, Cormier pointed out that chain wrestling adjustment on the commentary, but it was really nice that Burns, he seems to have had exactly in mind what you pointed out there, that he got Thompson to the cage. He was satisfied to hold on to that stalled double for almost a minute. And then when Thompson seemed to be just sort of settling in and getting comfortable, he switched to the single, which, as Cormier pointed out, took immediate advantage of the fact that Thompson had spread his base really wide to stop the double, and that compromised his balance for like a crackdown or running the pipe kind of finish on the single leg. Really smart decision. Burned some time.
Yeah, and he kept... And the thing is that at points, it looked like the fight was slipping away from him. And he just had a really disciplined performance, and it's worth remembering that championship mentality is a bit different. You shouldn't necessarily look at someone like Gilbert Burns and just think of him as a collection of very strong skill sets. He's not just someone who was an amazing grappler and then learned how to strike. He is a champion. And that means that he has had to learn. He has had to learn to be smart. He's had to learn to execute things like that. And I think that's kind of what we saw. I think it's certainly not the prettiest performance of his career, but in many ways, I think it's kind of the most impressive.
I tend to agree. Honestly, it kind of takes discipline to fight such a studied, dull fight that it wasn't altogether convincing. But when has Stephen Thompson ever won an ugly fight? Without controversy. That's how you beat him. I thought the other big thing, Tom, I think you mentioned this, that that Burns just sort of he stayed within himself very well. There is an idea, there's there's a kernel of truth to the idea that Woodley, beat Thompson deliberately, as if it wasn't a complete accident, everything that happened in those fights, but that he counterintuitively, you're a little safer hanging out at long range with Stephen Thompson than you are rushing into his counters. So just staying calm and thinking I can defend and or survive the long range stuff that comes at me seems to have been a really smart adjustment from Gilbert Burns.
Yeah, just not much to add there.
There's maybe not much more to say on this fight, to be honest. Not a lot happened, but that was by design.
I didn't even think it was that boring because, I think back to the rewatchability isn't going to be that great, but at least in the moment there was enough tension that kind of carried it through.
That's how all the Stephen Thompson losses are. They're only fun one time,
except for the Till and
Matt Brown Matt Brown. To be fair, that's a banger. Okay, well let's move on then to the main card opener, Sean O'Malley versus Chris Moutinho. And Phil, I think we owe an apology to Chris Moutinho, who does in fact embody the drawing of him on his Tapology photo t-shirt. Way more than we expected. That was a Hulk Moutinho level performance, by which I mean the Hulk's ability to take a million shots and not be killed.
Yeah, I mean, I'm extremely impressed by his ability to lose the battle and win the war against Sean O'Malley, perhaps the purest boxcar Hober performance we've ever seen.
Truly.
In where he literally lost the fight, but apparently is just visibly fine now, whereas Sean O'Malley has broken both his hands, his left tibia, and his right foot.
Wait, does Sean O'Malley have a bunch of injuries?
Apparently.
Chris Moutinho only has, of course, the horrifying invisible injuries that must come from a fight like that. But, go on, Tom.
Did y'all see the thing there? I guess after the fight, Sean O'Malley was he's probably in a hospital bed right now and all this stuff. And then someone who was with him just posted just Chris Moutinho just in the back eating an ice cream sandwich. But
literally dessert after eating 10,000 punches for dinner. How funny is it, by the way, just before we discuss any more of what happened here, how funny is it that this decision of Herb Dean's to stop this fight in the third round, this was the one that finally got Joe Rogan to criticize Herb Dean? I'm blown away by that. Joe Rogan has held on to the Herb Dean is the greatest ref in the world. He literally said that. He didn't say one of. He said, in my opinion, he is still the greatest ref in the world, but he shouldn't have stopped that guy after the 300 punches he absorbed because he was going to win. Because he deserved to eat 50 more or potentially get knocked out against Sean O'Malley, who was clearly pushing for the finish in the final minute of that fight.
Worst thing about Herb Dean is, I may have said this before, but is that he is all-terrain bad. He will be bad in every way that a ref can be bad.
Yeah.
He'll be hesitant on stoppage. He'll be hesitant to jump in sometimes. They'll go in early on others.
Yep.
He won't touch people up. He won't touch people in when he needs to break them up. But then he'll grab them and then say, "Oh, didn't mean it."
Yep.
He's so bad.
He will he'll become way too involved in the fight, but also not communicate his instructions clearly at all. He's a legend.
Throughout the course of the fight, did y'all also think a bunch of times that someone was going to run into Herb Dean? It seemed a lot of times over the course of the fight where usually O'Malley was circling and Herb Dean got out the last possible second, basically.
Yeah. I'm going to give him a pass on that one though, because it was a lot of Sean O'Malley running backwards and a lot of Chris Moutinho racing after him. So Tom, what were your expectations for this coming in? Obviously, Chris Moutinho was brought in to lose, was apparently handpicked by Sean O'Malley. Who then had to pretend after the fight that he picked Chris Moutinho because he's so courageous and brave, even though every indication beforehand was that he should have gotten slept by O'Malley in the first round. What did you expect coming in, and did you learn anything new about Sean O'Malley from seeing him deal with this unexpected test?
Well, I mean, like, basically, like, watching film on Moutinho was like, okay, this guy gets, like, just marches forward and gets hit, like, immediately, and, even against regional competition, and against regional competition, he at least, like, got back up, and he got knocked down, and then got back up, and, would make some things interesting, so I was like, all right, theoretically, he could at least, be a tough out, just if he keeps moving forward and eating stuff, but I didn't expect that to happen, so I just figured, all right, first round knockout. I'm more intrigued by, just O'Malley going forward, rather than, necessarily learning anything here. It just, he didn't react particularly well, especially, I believe, was even by the late first he was looking at the clock?
Yeah.
I'm trying to think how quickly it was before it was like, okay, he's very obviously
He found
bothered by this.
a second wind, but I think at the end of the first and going through the second, he was a little worried.
Yeah, there was just a constant worry, and it was all right, just, he stayed, basically my question is going forward whether or not he's just still going to go in and expect that, okay, I can knock this guy out, and, I'm not necessarily, having a backup plan, kind of in contrast to what we talked about, Conor McGregor, where it's, if there's, I think it's the same thing of if either they don't go away immediately, there is no backup plan, just I'm going to do this and there's no and then. But I think O'Malley at least adapted enough to okay, I can just keep retreating and hitting this guy and work through attrition, even though he was still obviously bothered in the time. So I'm just wondering, and part of this is going to come down to also who do they match him up with against someone who's going to challenge them. But I mean, if he winds up in a position like this, where just, he's going to be tagging someone who doesn't go away, is he going to, at some point, basically reach that point where he feels the need to start ironing out some of these problems? I did think at the very least, compared to something like the early fight against Terry and Ware or something, I thought he at least, held himself over 15 minutes, a little bit better, cardio-wise, even though he seemed more bothered. But
and also, less was effectively done to him.
Well, yes, yeah.
Again, it was mostly target practice, but still target practice going backwards. I don't consider this too bad a look for Sean O'Malley, to be honest. With some distance from it. Obviously, the expectation was he was going to wipe the floor with this man, and he didn't. But having been put into an unexpectedly difficult fight, he held it together okay. I think it showed his limitations, but it also could have demonstrated, potentially some growth.
So it's worth noting that we've gone. The narrative has at least shifted a little, because we've gone from him getting into some pretty decent trouble late in his fights to being someone who now has two third round stoppages against tough opponents. I mean, Moutinho obviously would have been a lot more of a threat if he had any discernible MMA skills.
Right. Or more meaningfully, any discernible boxing skills. He could have hit the body, for example, or fainted, or moved his head. Any of these things.
But yeah, it did show that someone who is legitimately. Yeah, the thing is that Moutinho toughness may not be replicable for many people.
Well, but it is still something you're gonna run into if you're a guy like Sean O'Malley. People you just can't put away.
Yep. Yeah. So the fact that he can be just driven backwards and kicked up to the legs and forced into exchanges that he doesn't want to is still a bad look for him. But as mentioned, he is at least showing that he can keep his own pace for 3 rounds, which is not always something you can say for hot knockout prospects. Your Eric Silvers and so on. There are just people who would just can't fight their own fight for 15 minutes, even if they're winning it.
That's Conor McGregor, whom Sean O'Malley has clearly modeled himself after, and he has.
McGregor at this point in his career certainly could. as he did against Max Holloway. He was able to dictate for 3 rounds. But...
Okay, at the early stage of his career, yeah, fair enough. But, maybe that's why it's for the best that O'Malley took some losses and some early disappointments. It has drawn him aside a little bit from that puncher's path, so he doesn't just keep getting more and more confident until he can't escape the pitfalls of his own style. I'll tell you what, if you want to gradate Sean O'Malley's level of competition, bring Kyle Bochniak back. That's just like Moutinho with discernible MMA skills. That's a great test for the exact same kind of fight, but harder.
I'm just going to worry they're going to try and rebook the Louis Smolka fight or something.
God.
We're not going to learn anything for another few months.
Yeah, although you know what? That's awful, and I still expect that Smolka's just going to get battered. But Smolka I don't think he's ever been knocked out. And as uncomfortable as it was to watch...
Has he never been?
I don't think he has. And as uncomfortable...
We looked this
never mind.
Yeah.
As uncomfortable as his fight with Matthews Nicolau was, since he got knocked down 4 times, he did find continually more moments of his own as that fight played out. So he might also be a reasonable test for Sean O'Malley. Plus, he has reach. He's got a weird, lanky frame, and Sean O'Malley strikes me as a guy who is really used to having that advantage.
Actually, never mind. I just kind of... Just the fact that Smolka's never been knocked out, it's okay, never mind. That changes my whole sort of.
It just seems like
that's the thing. You totally think of him as this noodly guy who gets. You can see him getting knocked down when you just think about him. Yeah. He's never actually
135.
Yeah.
So what?
I mean, he has been finished. Sorry, but he's never been knocked out.
Right. So what? What Tom would you like to see Sean O'Malley fix if we're taking him to the MMA garage here and equipping him for his next fight, potentially one like this, probably establishing a bit of a blueprint that future opponents will try to follow, even if it isn't their A game? What does Sean O'Malley need to add or potentially subtract?
I honestly, I'm just thinking of just kind of like you were talking about the whole puncher's path idea. Just mentality is kind of what I go down to. And I think in a certain sense this was promising, but I do kind of worry just again the path of the UFC's matchmaking in a layup thing. Just more thinking just about in terms of just who I'd like to see him fight. One idea I was kicking around, and then basically he immediately went and got booked. Was Jack Shore was an idea I really liked.
Sure,
it's probably, or even if I'm assuming they're either they're going to give him a layup or just kind of start having him test the top 15 again. So if Kyler Phillips beats Halion Paiva in 2 weeks,
that sounds like a really fun fight.
I think that's sort of a really interesting test. I think for both guys, honestly.
Kyler Phillips, who actually likes doing the thing that O'Malley was sort of forced into doing here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Phil, any thoughts? What should Sean O'Malley develop based on what happened here?
Wrestling game.
Offensive?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, I genuinely, I think the problem with O'Malley is that it's not happening to his chin. But we're still seeing that he's a fighter who has the very worrying trait of being someone who has bits falling off him all the time.
Yeah.
If that is genuinely true, and he fucked himself up by just kicking the shit out of Chris Moutinho for 3 rounds, I mean, that is a massive list of that is an impressive list of injuries.
Yeah.
Then he's just too fragile to fight people for 3 rounds on the feet. That's just the way it is. And on the one hand, it's well, he can't really develop a wrestling game at this stage in his career. But I honestly think that's sort of his only way of reducing the damage he's going to be taking. I just don't think in the bantamweight division you can't rely on fights being not brutal physical wars.
Sure.
And it's not like there's a lot of great grapplers in bantamweight. So I will give the completely impossible addition that he should develop a wrestling game because he's too frail.
Okay, I'm going to add I'm going to disagree with you slightly, but first I will agree in perhaps an unexpected way. I think wrestling would be a great addition. I just watched in preparation for the Benitez Quarantillo fight we're going to be watching, Quarantillo's fight with Gavin Tucker. And Gavin Tucker uses wrestling much in the same way I think Sean O'Malley could. Gavin Tucker is a great clinch fighter. He's also got great reactive takedowns. And these are the MMA fighter's equivalent of the boxer's punch and clutch game plan. You know, you punch, you fall into the clinch, you tie the guy up, and you basically force a bunch of resets so that you're not constantly being chased around and the guy can't build momentum. Fighters who are going to be put on the back foot, and again, I would say Sean O'Malley's not really that bad at it, as much as it might make him uncomfortable. We saw he's got a lot of tricks and a lot of the right ideas. I think the addition of a clinch game, the ability to step in and close distance on his own terms, would be really, really helpful for preventing fights from spiraling out of control, as this one almost did at several points. I'm also going to disagree with the idea, though, that that's the only way he can prevent injuring himself. And I think this sort of aligns with Tom's suggestion of a mental change being important. He just needs to stop.
You think he should also go all out for the finish in the first round?
No.
And then tap out at the end?
No. He should just stop hitting people so hard. You know, like...
Isn't he already doing that?
What do you mean?
Isn't that why we're getting hit finishes in the third round now?
I don't think so. No, I think it's more than proven that you don't need to hit people hard to knock them out. And that O'Malley, he still came out in the first round here just throwing bombs. Like, if you're fighting a guy like Chris Moutinho, who clearly has a considerable chin, again, has been knocked down and gotten back up to grind out other people before in his short, if unpromising career. He's coming in, he's tensed up, he's keeping his eyes on you, and he's just ready to get hit. He has come in clearly knowing that that's going to happen. And you're just going to bounce your hardest shots off his skull for 3 rounds? You can't hit a guy clean that often. You need to save the power shot, that clean power shot, for when he doesn't see the shit coming and he's not at all prepared for it. And then, you know, fighters describe the feeling of knocking someone out. It's like your punch just tears through a piece of paper. There's no resistance. That's what a clean punch ideally should feel like. It shouldn't feel like hitting a fucking brick wall, which is what it looked like throughout this fight. And same with the kicks. You know, McGregor threw his kicks so savagely hard, we assume, that he injured himself. Possibly even in camp, but there's no denying that he threw those kicks with murderous intent. Really just sold out on every single one. O'Malley does the same. He just throws everything really intently. And I think he just needs to be satisfied with the openings that are being given to him over and over again, and literally just touch. If the guy's running after you, you especially don't have to put power into your shots. You will be more effective and do more damage if you just let him run into light throws. Just a toss rather than a pitch. So I think those two things, like, O'Malley's got a good jab. He's got some of the right ideas for getting his head out of the way. He understands the different directions that threats might be coming from, and the basic sort of notion of changing positions, like sequentially, occupying different head slots and combining head movement with footwork. He's got all these basic ideas. I think he just needs to settle the fuck down and truly get over the idea that he's going to force the knockout on people and let it come to him. And he probably would stop breaking his hands. Like, for example, as a corollary, Daniel Cormier used to break his right hand all the time. What changed? Daniel Cormier became like a 5-round striker who doesn't just throw fastball pitches with every single shot he throws. I mean, that's one interpretation.
Cub Swanson used to break his hands all the time.
Yeah, and Cub Swanson...
And he started knocking people out all the time.
Right. But part of knocking people out all the time was becoming a much better boxer. And I think part of that for Cormier, too, was learning to close a proper fist. because there's so many old pictures of Cormier hitting people with his thumb sticking out like he's wearing 16-ounce gloves, and that is a bad way to hit when you're essentially bare-knuckled. But I think just like you don't have to sell out on shit, and it is very much the tendency of MMA fighters to sell out thinking they have to maximize the damage they're doing. And it's one of those counterintuitive things about fighting that easing up will in fact put you in a better position to continue delivering more and more damage. When we come back, on to previews. Islam Makhachev versus Thiago Moises. If we've got time for it, which we may not at this point, we're also looking to get into Gabriel Benitez, Mowgli Benitez versus Billy Quarantillo after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
Welcome back to Heavy Hands. We have 2 more fights to discuss as briefly as we can, so strap yourselves in for another 40 minutes of discussion. Our main event coming up this next week, Tom, our preview expert. We're in your comfort zone now, in your wheelhouse, saying what's gonna happen. Which is, I don't know, a really boring expertise now that I put it that way. Islam Makhachev versus Thiago Moises. An interesting main event. So, well, it's technically a main event. Tell me your thoughts on it.
I mean, I do actually like this card, but I am very sad this was supposed to be the Holloway Rodriguez card, which would have really, having that on top would have clicked everything else into place. Yeah. Moises just, has a solidly unspectacular game that just, is really surprising. He's 25 or 26 at this point, that he's still that young. And it's very interesting that basically Makhachev's path towards relevancy now, it looks like is going to be just out wrestling people who were previously out wrestled by Beneil Dariush. So
yeah,
it's interesting in that Moises is dangerous. He has some power. He's been doing a little bit better of a job of pressing things a little bit on the feet, and he has jiu-jitsu, which I think is going to at least force Makhachev to take maybe a little bit of a more patient approach. I think the difference in his approach. Going to the Dober fight, one of the big things was Makhachev, even though I think he's a much better striker than he was when he got knocked out by Adriano Martins. I believe it was Martins. I was like, okay, it's going to be interesting to see if he basically takes the approach he took against Davi Hamosh and is just very, takes a while to feel things out and just, goes before he goes for the wrestling. Or if he just from Jump Street decides, okay, I'm just going to out wrestle this guy Dober since he has no jiu-jitsu, isn't going to threaten me at all on the ground. And that's what he did. So, curious to see basically how long Makhachev, takes, knowing that, Moises at least has, some skill. How long he takes before he decides to start implementing the wrestling, because I think at that point, basically, the fight's going to be a wrap. Because I think in those moments, that Moises is at least, it's still a low percentage, but at least there's going he could at least get enough done with his counters and stuff like that. Yeah.
That's sort of what makes it. It's sort of what makes it a little less interesting than I wish. Is that Moises has his path as a finish against a guy that I have long seen as the Sergio to Khabib Nurmagomedov's Pretty Tony.
Yes.
In that less intensity, less physicality, but very technically capable, and perfectly willing to fight a less than thrilling fight if it means securing the win.
Also, another thing I didn't think to bring up is also the fact that this is five. I mean, losing Holloway Rodriguez hurts, but the fact that this is 5 rounds is actually something else that's interesting. Where, okay, even if Makhachev takes a wrestling heavy approach, can he do it for 25 minutes instead of 15? Especially because Moises, actually, I even saw him when he was on the regional scene. He was a champion in, or at least was in title fights in RFA or one of the two pre-LFA things. And I think he even been an LFA champ. But he has experience, going 5 rounds and getting late finishes. So that's another dynamic where
he's been 5 rounds 3 times and got a 5th round TKO of Jamal Emmers.
Yep. Yeah, that was the card I was at. Yep. So.
Yeah. So that is actually that's an interesting thought. Makhachev, not exactly the most consistent finisher, and also not exactly able to deliver the kind of like mental breakage that spiritual big brother Khabib does. And so we could potentially be looking at you're giving this guy who can only win by finish 25 minutes to try kind of dynamic, which is, I guess, a little interesting. And maybe a little bit of tension that'll keep you compelled through what may not be a terrific back and forth fight.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Phil, can he make Islam Makhachev look like Michael Johnson?
No.
On the feet and on the ground. Can he just get tuned up with straight punches, but then lock Islam Makhachev? I think the one is more likely to happen than the other, but I'll let you give me your thoughts. No?
God could not make Islam Makhachev look like Michael Johnson. You would struggle to find 2 more opposite fighters in approach and skill set than Islam Makhachev and
They're
Michael
both
Johnson.
southpaws.
Yes.
God is responsible for that. All right, so careful before you try to test the Almighty.
Yeah, I mean, Moises is a sort of interesting jack of all trades kind of guy.
Yeah.
He's developed, I think, much more patience and counterpunching ability. He just looks like physically bigger than he did when he was starting the UFC. I think just the strength and conditioning, and everything that comes with that when you're a UFC fighter.
Yep.
is probably helping to bulk him out. And he's hitting with a bit more power. He can win controlled decisions in a way that he didn't used to be able to before. I thought he beat Alexander Hernandez and Bobby Green both reasonably convincingly in sort of 2 different kinds of patient fight. Bobby Green is someone who's going to sort of want to fence with you, and Hernandez is someone who's going to want to run away and make you run into counters. And he handled both of those nicely. So he can handle sort of managing the pace, and he's become better at winning rounds in that context. Do I think that what happened in the Dariush fight, which is him getting pushed into the fence and losing double underhooks and getting taken down over and over, is going to happen? Yes. That is the end of my preview.
Yeah, actually,
I think No, I don't think Makhachev can finish him. I think we're in for 5 rounds.
Yeah, we could be. I think actually I'm interested to see if Makhachev will push that approach outright, because he notably did not do very much grappling, if any. I can't exactly recall, against Davi Hamosh, who is another credentialed, well-respected jiu-jitsu black belt who likes to counterpunch. And he really fought a pretty controlled striking match using these nice straight punches. And I'm kind of wondering if that's the direction he'll go here, because as impressive as the turnaround was, he got absolutely chewed up by Michael Johnson for the entirety of a first round, which is actually why I'm going to slightly disagree. I'm with your first point. I'm not so sure that Thiago Moises does manage the pace. I think he lets the opponent dictate the pace. He really seems to lean towards counterpunching as a default mode. And he's gotten a lot better at that. And he's got surprising speed and power that demands respect. I think he sort of managed Bobby Green's pace and Alexander Hernandez's pace well. But if they had fought differently, those fights would have looked a lot different. It's not like Moises is in there enforcing his game on basically anyone that he's fighting. So I think we're likely looking at a slow start where Makhachev gets to land his jabs, gets to find openings for that left hand, and who knows? Makhachev is not the most durable guy in the world. Ramos dropped him with a counter jab, or at least badly staggered him. And, of course, Tom already mentioned the knockout loss to Adriana Martins, which I believe was also on a counter. But in that Ramos fight, Makhachev held it together super well and also showed just how far his striking has come since the Martins fight in building a lot of confusing layers beyond the space where Ramos was comfortable trying to counter. Throwing away one punch to land another, hitting the body, breaking rhythm with feints in between punches. A lot of different tricks that he has now to keep someone on the back foot once he feels he has to turn his striking on, or once he gets sort of forced into that flow state. I think we're looking at a lot of that, to be honest. Ramos being picked apart at range with his back to the fence.
Moises.
Oh, yeah, Moises, sorry.
Yeah. Wow, we're really selling this fight. So we're predicting a slow start where Makhachev is going to work his great striking, and then that Moises also is not going to be able to handle his offensive wrestling, but will have the grappling to survive. Hey.
Yep.
You're basically, like I said, to me it seems like if you're going to be enjoying this fight, it's because you're holding on to the idea. I mean, either you are enjoying what I think could be a very impressive striking exhibition from Makhachev, who I will say has become quite a good kickboxer, or you're holding on to the notion that Moises can find a big counter or is always ready to create a wild scramble and look to tear something off on the ground. So, my safe bet would be, if you want to enjoy this, come in expecting Makhachev to do a bit of a masterclass showing off his well-rounded game, and you'll probably see a lot of pretty ideas, and then possibly be pleasantly surprised by a horrible mess breaking out at some point. Okay, main card opener for this one. Last thing we have time to discuss here. Mowgli Benitez, one of my personal favorite fighters, versus Billy Quarantillo, and I love this fight not only because Benitez is one of my favorite fighters, but because this is the classic technical action matchup. You have a relentless pressure fighter who beats people with pace versus a fast technical counterpuncher who, by the way, if Quarantillo comes in not wanting to push the pace, trying something different, can tear him up with kicks at long range and force him into that kind of fight. So we're looking at a lot of clashes, two styles that just pair really well. Tom, what is your take on the dynamic here?
I mean, you basically broke down when you brought up in the the prep for recording that this is the fight you want to talk about on this card. I was like, yeah, this is I was like, damn you, because this is probably the one I at least have a much of a read on past the dynamic that you just outlined.
Well, right,
because the Quarantillo loss against Gavin Tucker, it was both, that was actually where I expected him to kind of hit the ceiling with his approach of, I am just going to wade through everything and, bet I'm going to exhaust my opponent, let it all sort out. But it was also just pretty disheartening in a way I forget if it was on the recording or beforehand, just Tucker just, basically, turned things around with the wrestling and actually, was out wrestling Quarantillo by the end. So it was just sort of this weird thing of Benitez, I view as someone who, can hold his own anywhere, but can often just kind of consent to, he's a sharp counter, striker, like I said, but can also consent a lot to what his opponent's trying to do. So if Quarantillo, if he just keeps clashing with Benitez, I think he's going to be able to keep clashing, basically, but I also don't think he's I don't think he's going to be able to like get a ton done, but also he's like not going to be able to exhaust Benitez. And I'm going back and forth trying to figure out basically like what's the one path, obviously towards a win that I can see for either man. And I just think it's going to be like a fun mess, but a mess, like, as is true in most Quarantillo fights.
Phil, thoughts? Any insights for Tom's troubled brain?
I think the main thing is, do I really trust Quarantillo against a super defined southpaw like Benitez after that Gavin Tucker fight?
Mm-hmm.
Because Tucker's disadvantage in that fight was, as it always is, that he's a kind of stocky dude. But this was still, a fight where Quarantillo was struggling to control the distance, was getting caught up in the hand fight.
Yeah.
And it was more Quarantillo's reach that was keeping him in, just by the fact that he could like throw body kicks at Tucker from miles away. Is he going to body kick with Gabriel Benitez?
I think he's going to try.
I don't think that's a good idea. I don't think you should trade body kicks with Gabriel Benitez.
Well, I mean, I think Quarantillo is the kind of guy whose approach is do all the things you do in every fight.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So, even if I think it would be okay if it's part of him pushing Benitez on the back foot and keeping him in a retreat. You don't want to be in open space trading body kicks with Benitez. Yeah, absolutely not. There's an option there. The thing with the Tucker fight, though, that makes this one more interesting and difficult to predict, is what we've all noted now, that Tucker's wrestling, and especially his clinch. That's the thing. It wasn't just the takedowns that were really, like, I think actually kind of saving him by the end because Quarantillo was coming on hard. It was also that he could just create clinches, and he was actually carving Quarantillo up with elbows in these short clinches, despite the height difference. Benitez isn't really that kind of fighter. He's not an offensive wrestler to any significant degree. If anything, his answer to the wrestling phase is guillotines. That's his go-to response to people trying to wrestle him. He doesn't really push a wrestling game on anybody else, and he's never been particularly insistent on getting a clinch or very effective there. So, yes, he can crack Quarantillo in all the same ways as Gavin Tucker, but can he neutralize him without knocking him out? It's right. It's an open question. I'm starting to see
basically where I landed, where I'm like,
starting to see
I think Quarantillo is going to be dictated, and I'm almost like, and you could just, I don't know if it's the right shout, but like part of me looking at this like, without knowing how the fight was going to play out, kind of almost got like the same vibes as Aldana Kunitskaya, where it's one person who's going to be pressuring and dictating things is going to be a bit of a mess, but in the moments when it's not a mess, is
because I guess Benitez has been out-weirded and out-willed before.
Sure.
Classic example is Enrique Barzola, who again did actually kick quite a lot with him and just chased him down for the whole fight.
Yep, and out-wrestled him and just kept a mess in his face the entire time. Notably, it did come with a finish, but Andre Fili ran Benitez into the cage and kicked him in the damn head. So, Quarantillo has a height advantage, does throw high kicks. Something like that could also happen. He's not Justin James, he's not limited. The thing with Quarantillo is he is going to keep coming, and he will, if not come up with new ideas, he will tack more and more ideas together. So yeah, I don't have a strong read. I totally agree, Tom. I think the Aldana Kunitskaya comparison is a strong one, except that I think Benitez is more potent than Aldana, and Quarantillo is also more potent than Kunitskaya by a pretty good margin. So if we were going to mimic my pick in that one, you'd take the guy you expect to deliver more instantaneous damage, and I guess that's Benitez. But he's delivering that damage in a really uncomfortable fight where, like, he has to keep coming up with answers. I don't know. I think Benitez responds to pressure pretty well, though. I mean, I think...
Yeah, I mean, the thing is with my difference between... I think the difference between, like, Barzola and Benitez is that... I mean, sorry, not Benitez, Quarantillo, is that Barzola is constantly crashing the clinch.
Yeah.
He's constantly spamming takedowns, which don't work, but they are very tiring and upsetting.
How dare you? He took Benitez down 9 times.
Yes.
They do work. Well,
yeah.
He gets back up, if that's your point.
Yes. But...
They fulfill their purpose.
Does, he is constantly shooting.
Yeah.
Constantly making you work. Quarantillo is not quite that guy. He's more in your face the whole time.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if that's quite the same thing, because I think that allows Benitez to be running his game. That allows Benitez to be doing what he wants to be doing, which is looking for counterpunches much more often. Mm-hmm. I do favor Benitez reasonably strongly, I think.
Yeah, there's also the fact that Barzola is, if not technically that much better, he is mentally far more prepared to, like, do something about getting hit with the same thing over and over again. Whereas Quarantillo is like, no, you keep hitting me, that's what tires you out. He's going to get hit clean, and he's not...
No, Barzola is kind of like that.
He is a bit, but he will look for, like, level changes. He will look for weird counters. He's harder to hit than he seems like he should be, Barzola. Quarantillo is every bit as easy to hit as it seems like he is. So, let me look at the numbers. Benitez, yep. Barzola. Benitez landed 51 to Barzola's 46. Gavin Tucker hit Billy Quarantillo with 106 significant strikes.
Oh, okay then.
Granted, that's not a direct comparison, but I think Quarantillo is more hittable, and not just because he's not. I mean, in part actually because he's not, like, out wrestling and neutralizing his opponent and making them scramble. So yeah, I pick Benitez as well. Same pick essentially as the Aldana Kunitskaya fight for very much the same reasons. But Tom, have we clarified things for you, or are you just going to make a guess like we just did?
Oh, so that was actually just. I mean, I've already written my preview. And actually, I picked Quarantillo with increasingly little, or I guess decreasing confidence.
No, don't. We have now both picked the same fighter, so you should be more confident than ever.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that does it then for this week's Heavy Hands. Tom Feely of Sherdog.com writes all the Sherdog previews and does a really good job of it. Where can people find you online, Tom, and is there anything you would like them to check out in particular?
So my Twitter is OMG, as in oh my god. It's Feely, my last name Feely. Really just all I'm doing is the Sherdog previews. So yeah, check those out. Follow me on Twitter. Sometimes I'll post a cat picture and have weird thoughts about things.
And he is a great audience for any of the remaining jokes you may have about Conor McGregor's broken leg.
Yes.
DM all of those to Tom. Phil, what about you? Anything to plug this week?
Nope, not this week. Taking one off. I don't think they'll be calling us to write anything about the apparent barben banner between Makhachev and Moises. But obviously be back at some point. Well, the next pay-per-view is quite some way in the distance.
Yeah.
So, no toes-to-toes for the foreseeable future.
All right. As for me, I'm going to once again make the dangerous decision to plug something that's not done being written yet, but I'm working on a sort of a technique recap, just like 3 little glimpses of technique from 3 different fights at UFC 264. I think I've settled on the main event, of course, because I want people to read it. Aldana Kunitskaya, and I think I've got a couple interesting ideas for Tavares Omari Akhmedov, maybe on setting up low kicks. So check those out. You'll find that and all of Phil's toe-to-toe previews with David Castillo on bloodyelbow.com. You can find Phil and I on Twitter, just like Tom. Phil is at Evil Greg Jackson. I am at Boxing Bush, B-U-S-C-H. And make sure you check out our Patreon. There was a lot of discussion of the UFC 264 undercard that did not make it into the final cut of this episode. If you want to hear us discuss essentially everything from everything after Thompson Burns, you should check out our Patreon. It's $3 a month to get access to all our bonus episodes. And just to mention it again, I will be recording a Chocolatito Gonzalez versus Juan Francisco Estrada 2 commentary with Kyle McLaughlin. We were supposed to do it this Sunday, but Kyle postponed it so that he could watch his stupid soccer team lose. So I hope he feels appropriately bad about that decision and will now be guilted into doing that this week so we can get you. Neither of us has seen that fight, and I know it's a banger. So I'm still very much looking forward to that, and hopefully we will get that to you guys before the end of this month on the Patreon. All right, well, thank you all so much for listening. A big thank you again to Tom Feely for joining us. Really enjoyed talking to you, Tom. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yes, we're very happy to have you. And if you all listening came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.
Oh, what was I laughing at now? Oh, yes, that crippled Irishman.